Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to ITW Presents Vista 2020. Today's event is brought to you by the Sakra World Hospital, Vista's health and wellness partner. They are the first Indian MNC hospital committed to advanced medical care through innovative and efficient services. We have with us today three esteemed panelists. First, we have Mr. Ranajay Datta, Chief Executive Officer and whole-time Director, Interglobe Aviation. He's a graduate from IIT Kharagpur and has completed his MBA from the Harvard Business School. An aviation veteran, he was with the United Airlines for nearly 20 years, holding a broad spectrum of leadership positions in planning, maintenance, finance, and information technology. He was an advisor to both Air Canada and US Airways during their restructuring and was engaged in long-term consulting contracts with Hawaiian Airlines and Air Canada. He has served on the boards of United Airlines, US Airways, and Marisco Trust Funds. He also has experience in the Indian aviation sector, having worked with Air Sahara as president for 2 years. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Second, we have with us Mr. Nikhil Prasad Ojha, partner in Bain & Company's Mumbai office. He leads Bain's strategy practice in India and is also a member of Bain's consumer product practice. He has more than 20 years of consulting and industry experience in India and abroad. The clients he advises come from the consumer goods, auto, agricultural equipment, and financial services sectors. Alongside client service work, he has led Bain's intellectual property development in key areas. His 2016 article series, marking 25 years of India's liberalization in Mint, a leading business daily, was published as a book in 2017. He's a regular contributor to the business press in India and has published more than 30 articles across issues of strategy, scenario planning, innovation, customer experience, and sales and marketing imperatives in different sectors. He has earned an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and a BA with honors in economics from the University of Delhi. Welcome, sir. We are very happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Third, we have with us Mr. Arjun Rajappa, Partner Director of Product Management at Microsoft India Development Center with 20 plus years of product management experience. He heads the product management team for Microsoft Teams in India, building Teams mobile, key Teams desktop experiences, and the Teams IT admin experiences. He also leads the emerging market strategic initiatives for Microsoft India, partnering with customers across India to democratize productivity for the next billion. He graduated from ISB in 2003 and started his career at Microsoft as a product manager for Outlook. He's a champion for entrepreneurship, emerging markets, diversity and inclusion, and the future of work at Microsoft. Welcome, sir, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
This session is going to be moderated by Professor Saurav Mukherjee. Professor Mukherjee teaches postgraduate courses at IIM Bangalore on organization design and inclusive business models. Prior to joining IIMB, he worked with IBM and Oracle in sales and product management functions and for the Boston Consulting Group as a strategy consultant. He has been a consultant to organizations in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors, advising them on organizational design and financial sustainability. He received the UNDP Fellowship for Research in Inclusive Business Models and the Wilgrow Fellowship for Research on Social Entrepreneurship. He also sits on the governing and advisory boards of not-for-profit and educational institutions. Without any delay, I would like to hand over to Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to all the participants in for Vista for this particular session. Of course, I am honored to have leading this panel with such distinguished panelists. What we have done here today is we have actually asked each of the panel members to reflect upon 3 or 4 questions, and I will quickly run you over through the questions. And then each of them will actually talk about the topics based on whichever question they would like to spend more time with for about 8 to 10 minutes. And post which, if we have some questions, if I have some questions, I will ask them. Otherwise, we will throw it open to the audience. So for all of you who have questions, you will find that there are the students with IDs as Q&A. You please send them the questions. Maybe you can do it over the chat and they will collate the questions and then we will ask the panelists about the questions. We have a total of 90 minutes to run this session, probably about 85 minutes more. and we will go about it. So first, I will take you through the 4 questions which we had sent to the panelists, and they are mostly going to focus on a few or all of them. The first question that we had for them was, after more than 6 months into the pandemic, what do the panelists see are the short, medium, and long-term impact of COVID in their organization, on the industry, or on the economy? And each of them can choose whichever they want to dwell upon. In the same context, a lot has been talked about resilience, that how do we come out of this situation? How do we deal with this situation, both at a personal as well as a professional level? And we have asked the panelists to dwell a little bit on that what are their reflections? How are they seeing the organizations as well as individuals dealing with it in an effective manner? While there is still considerable uncertainty about how the situation is going to unfold and are we going to get out of it completely ever, what in their view that should organizations do to deal with this current situation and be ready for the future? So this is a little bit of future gazing as well as advising based on whatever little we have learned so far about the pandemic. And finally, we also asked them that, is there anything positive that we can take out of it, or out of this current crisis? So these are the 4 questions on which each of the panel members will share their views for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then we will have kind of a discussion sessions based on some questions and answers. So I hand it over again to the hosts, the students, who will deal with the sequence of the panelists. You can decide who goes first. I'm assuming that is it Mr. Nikhil Ojha who is going to talk first.
I'm happy to, Prof. Thank you very much for having me at the session. And I'm going to, talk about the third question that you outlined, and really think about, what do the organizations think about with respect to both the current changes as well as the future that's coming up. And if I may, I'll just use a couple of slides to talk through for the audience. And I want to begin by the realization that, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does sometimes rhyme. And if you think about, what is it that we can learn from the last time that the industry and the economy went into a shock, a very different type of shock than what we are in the middle of right now. But this is data from the last, 2007, 2008 recession. The thing to remember is that, it is absolutely imperative to be in the act of, changing things today, because the 70% of the gap between the winners and losers, which you can say with hindsight today, actually was built based on how ready they were for the shock and what they did during the shock. Those who acknowledged the problem late, actually have had a decade of underperformance versus those who took opportunities and accelerated growth once the shock was behind them. So that's one important thing to keep in mind as we think about the number of changes that are going on. Now, for any given industry, we can actually, come up with a list of, 4, 6, 10, tiles such as the one that you see on this page. But the fact is that the post-pandemic world will be different. Now, we can talk in detail about any or all of these tiles, but that's not the important thing, because the one other aspect that I do want this audience to think about is that, how much do you think about a particular difference that is going to happen versus this notion that, actually the world is going to be changing, and that does not diminish the importance of planning. If anything, it accentuates it. So, when you think about your third question and the current stuff, that's what I want to focus on in terms of thinking about the importance of planning in times such as these, and to use a very lateral example from this, I invite you to quickly skim through this memo, which was written by the then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to the US President George W. Bush, talking about a quadrennial defense review that the US government does. And the brilliant thing that, because of which, I went back and retrieved this was what the memo was. It was all of 1 page long. And this was the memo. I'm going to just stay quiet for a minute for people to read through this. Okay, you will have this document, I've sent it to the organizers. But, to me, there were two things which stood out. The last line, all of which is to say that I'm not sure what 2010 will look like, but I'm sure that it will be very little like what we expect. So we should plan accordingly. This is not to say such a brilliant distillation of the last century is not to say that, I do not know what the future is going to look like, therefore why plan? It is to say that, I do not know what 2010 is going to look like, so we should plan accordingly. And the second brilliant thing was the date on which it was written. This was in April 12th of 2001, and we know what happened at 9/11, 2001. So that's the important thing with respect to what I talk to my clients about planning and the importance of planning. This is from a short-term view, to say to yourself that, yep, I know the future is going to be uncertain, and therefore I have to plan accordingly. So that's one theme. On your, longer-term question, Prof. Mukherjee, this is the other thing that came to my mind was that what we are living through in COVID is actually a precipitation of things that were already under play. Yes, this was an absolute shock to the world, but we should not just focus on the proximate things. We should ask ourselves, what is the unfolding that we have been going through over a number of years now? It's important to just, I'm a history buff myself, that's germane to this, but we are going through a change of business eras where everything we think about the nature of the firm itself is changing. A lot of how we think about current businesses and what a business is was shaped in the late 1880s around the world, when a lot of founder-led organizations were defining the business. These businesses were defined by the founders who horizontally or vertically integrated a full industry and created the first modern business. If you think about Rockefeller or Ford or Kroger or Mitsubishi, these were companies that were formed by the sheer will of the founder. That began to change in the 1920s for two fundamental reasons. These guys became, and they were mostly guys back then, these guys became old, and the government started taking more of an interest in the business as they became too big and started breaking them apart. That led to the start of the professional management system in the 1920s. And in many MBA programs, the first book you read is the biography of Alfred Sloan, who talks about the fact that, look, the job of the professional management is to make sure that the institution is not dependent upon the personality of a single individual professional, but these professionals are custodians of the business. They are fungible. If one of them breaks, you go and hire a new one. They are perfectly disposable, right? That was from the 1920s till about 1970s when Mike Jensen comes across and talks about why are these general managers, why are these General Motors GMs, billing their country club membership to the firm? And the real problem is that, the interest of the shareholder and the managers aren't aligned, and therefore, if only we can change that. And all that led to the era of Jack Welch and GE and ABB turnaround and Blackstone and, shareholder primacy. But if you look at who has created value in the business sphere in the last 10 to 15 years, it's not the GEs and the ABBs of the world. It is actually the Alibabas, Facebook, Amazons, and the Googles of this world. They are not the shareholder primacy companies. So one thing that I would like to invite this group as well as the participant to also think about is what is the change that is happening with respect to the nature of the firm itself, and the fact that it is an era of scale insurgents that coming in who are neither tied down by the fact that they have not been around for many, many decades, nor are they tied down by the fact that they are small, new to begin with, and a lot of things are changing with respect to the way they manage themselves. And that, we believe, is going to be the nature of the firm and those who are really going to win going forward. So once again, thank you for the time. Two things. One is with respect to, we do not know what the future is going to be like, but we have to plan accordingly. And second, let's also remember that this is an acceleration of the trend as much as it's a shock that has happened to the world in the moment.
Thank you, Nikhil, for such a powerful opening. I do have a question which I am going to ask you now because it is very related. I mean, the data that we see the last couple of months now, which is coming out, they are saying that the gap between the rich and the poor, or the gap, the inequality, has been accentuated by this COVID, by the pandemic. And it's interesting that the kind of companies that you had put in the last panel, but we are saying that it is about scaling in leveraging the digital media rather than the shareholder primacy. And if I am going to guess, then it will be the owners and the CEOs of this company who will be today at the top of the pile. So how do you reconcile this, that on one hand the world is going through a crisis which is medical, humanitarian, whatever you talk about, and on the other hand we are seeing that there's an gap between the haves and the have-nots are increasing. How do you reconcile this? Are we again going back to the ancient era of the hero, the leader, and it is the Elon Musks of the world and maybe Sundar Pichais of the world who are once again starting to dominate?
So Saurabh, I had talked about this with respect to the professional manager or the tomorrow's entrepreneur. You're absolutely right about the societal impact of this shift. And now I can take you back to 100 years to say that when the era of the robber barons ended, it was because of a much more activist state. It was followed by 2 decades of Keynesian economics, New Deal, etc., etc. But I do think that this exacerbation of income inequalities is absolutely not sustainable. If the leadership, political leadership around the world is moves to being more rational and more data driven, then I think we will see much higher taxation, much better social policies, etc., coming back. But given the evidence of the people in power around different jurisdictions, I'm not very hopeful of that in the short term.
Okay, thank you. So we will next invite Mr. Ranuja Datta to make his comments on the set of questions that we are grappling with this morning.
Yeah, so I will talk about COVID first, then talk of the long term, what happens post-COVID. I'll start by saying that we'll probably look back and say that COVID was a good thing that happened to the planet. Yes, there'll be a lot of deaths, etc. But COVID will force us to reset the planet in many significant ways. I think before COVID, we all had this sense that the planet was going in the wrong direction. It was going in the wrong direction because everything was being designed to the elites of the society. Labor, capitalism says, well, capital gets its return, labor will get its return, and land will get its return. What's happened over the last 50 years or so, ever since 1970 or 80, is that capital has been getting outsized returns and labor has been getting very little returns. And the elites have designed the world in such a way that production moves to a few places with cheap labor. So the capitalists make a lot of earnings, but everywhere else, labor unions are in decline. If you look at the US, when was the last time they did anything for their people? Johnson did something with Medicare and Medicaid, and that was back in 1970s. Since then, the US economy has grown 2-3 times. What have they done for their citizens? Nothing. So you're seeing all this unrest because it's like, yeah, we're a great country, you're great, America is exceptional. What has happened to the average American in the last 50, 60 years? They've got nothing. Instead, all the money has gone to the top few percentage of people, and you're seeing a reset there that is very essential. We look at where this labor is being forced to behave in terms of migration. So yes, everything moves to China, but in China, the labor has to force to move from the west to the east. In India, they move from Ranchi to Coimbatore, leave their families behind. This is not a good thing for the planet. So resetting all these supply chains of having ships carry goods from one place to another, polluting the economy, the labor not getting their fair share, labor being torn apart from the families, this is all wrong. So COVID is going to force a change. The lifestyles of the rich. Let's have big fat weddings with 3,000 people, fly everyone to Istanbul. Shameful stuff. What are we doing to this planet? And the other 1 billion people have to watch all this on TV. Healthcare access. Yes, healthcare is great. It's for the best, and we have the best hospital if you're rich. If you're poor and in a village, you're out of luck. Healthcare has to change. Education has to change. Why all these elite schools in a few places? What about the poor guy in the village? How does he have access to education? Online learning will change that. Lifestyles. Yes, both parents work till you're dead. Work from 7 in the morning till 8 in the night, and your kids in daycare somewhere. No, work from home, look after your kid. I think all of this, careful what you eat, careful how you live, careful how incomes are distribution, take care of the family. This was a very necessary reset. And I'm really glad it's happening because before that, the planet was really hurtling in the wrong direction altogether. Let's the macro, if you will. What happens? Well, I'll talk about micro industry and then go to the long term. I'm still in COVID phase. So what do we do at a micro level? Well, we have taken this time to really rethink about what kind of a company we are. And yes, Indigo has always been a great company, lowest cost, high growth, etc. But we're looking at other elements that we can improve quickly. Customer service, employee engagement, our brand value. So we will, in fact, come out of this crisis. And you hear this everywhere, but I know it's true for us and probably for a lot more companies. We'll come out a lot stronger. We'll come out a better company. Instead of being focusing only on costs and finances, we are focusing on our employees, on our customers, and trying to improve the quality of all of them. Now let me talk about the long term. Forget COVID. What's going to happen? What should happen? And I will turn the focus back to you guys right now. Because this country has suffered through 500 years of deprivation. And who's going to change it? Well, who changed it in China? Good things don't just happen. They're made to happen. And in 15 years, China's economy grew 10 times. Its wages increased 6 times. Poverty level declined from 41% to 5% during Deng Xiaoping. That is something the whole world should applaud. That is elevating the condition of human existence. We need to do that in India. But who and how? Well, what works is meritocracy. What happened in China is they have a long history of what they call the Mandarin bureaucracy. They have the Jinshu exam, which was put in place in 600 AD. And it's like, hey, you want to work for government, you go through this Jinshu exam. And it's a very, very tough exam. But it creates the best minds in society to work for government. So Deng Xiaoping goes to Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and it's all paddy fields. And he said, we will build the best and the biggest economic zone right here. And miraculously it happens. How does it happen? It happens because of that strong bureaucracy of the best minds in the country. Now, India is weak in many ways. Our primary education is weak, our secondary education is weak. But we distinguish ourselves on tertiary education. So if China has this Jinshu exam, we have the IITs, we have the IIMs, which is you guys. So we have the best minds here. And you shouldn't be looking at the world and say, I wonder what will happen. No. You should be looking at the world and say, this is what must happen and we will do it. So bring our poverty levels down. Bring our wages up. Improve productivity. The onus really of making it happen is you. And if you guys are passionate and skillful and dedicated, you will make it happen. But please realize the country is relying on you to make this work. Okay, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Datta. One, you started on a very hopeful note that something good will come out of this. And of course, your message very powerful for our students, which is very important. I just want to ask you a question, because you yourself said that good things don't happen on their own. They got to be made to be happening. So what exactly is the trigger, in the sense, I totally agree with you that there is so much of inequality. There is so many things that needs to be done to kind of mitigate that. But what is the link between this crisis and people would kind of change their behavior and we will be more conscious about inequality? What is the link that you see in your mind?
Yeah. So there's clearly the government and there's the private sector. If you looked at China, they relied more on the government. They will do things. You look at Xi Jinping's latest speeches and all that, and they're saying, hey, we'll be more consumer, internally consumption, more technology. So he's got a clear vision and they'll make it work. For us, it really is up to the private sector, which is a very decentralized approach. There's no top-down planning. We all have to do bottoms-up planning and make it happen. But we have to focus on our people most of all. So yes, Indigo, it has always been very successful. It has done many things right. But our approach right now is, hey, we are an army of 25,000 people. We want to make change, we can make it happen. And our customer surveys are going through the roof. And you know what? Yes, we made some changes to the product, but we've really energized our people through communications, through teamwork, through training, into being a strong customer-oriented company. And people are feeling good about it. Although we're taking pay cuts, it's not like, oh, you pay people more and you get good service. Not true. We've taken pay cuts, we've laid off about 12% of our people, but still our employee engagement and motivation is going through the roof. There are opportunities right now. And again, this is too airline specific for a broader audience. But obviously part of the crisis, part of the reason Indian aviation is always in crisis is because we have too many hubs built around us in Abu Dhabi and Singapore and Thailand. And that's why Indian aviation always struggles. Well, there's a reset here and it's an opportunity for us. So we have to work on those as well. But whatever industry you're in, improve productivity, get your people energized, we have to make a step function improvement in a country and do what China has done. We have to reduce poverty levels significantly and quickly. And really, if I have one lesson that I've learned, it all depends on a few people and the meritocracy of those people. It's not like, oh yeah, suddenly 1 billion people become smarter, harder working, etc. They're led by a handful of people. And that happened in the US, or that happened in China. We need for that to happen in India. And really, I have great admiration, faith, and hope in the IITs and the IIMs of this country. Thank God we built those institutions.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure me and many of the other participants will come back to you with other interesting questions. We next have Mr. Arun Rajappa. Arun, please make your opening comments about the topic.
Yeah, thank you for the warm introduction. Firstly, it's a privilege to be part of the panel with you, Professor Mukherjee, and distinguished senior leaders, Mr. Roja and Mr. Datta from the industry. I'll speak more from a technology, a technocratic perspective, and bring that to this conversation. So, of course, our lives have been transformed in the last 6 months, and many of us are spending hours on Teams calls with the boundaries between work and life becoming more blurred. For those of us who've had the privilege to work from home, I think the initial euphoria of spending time at home has been replaced with increasing tiredness as we have to juggle work, personal commitments, while dealing with the anxiety of the health and safety of loved ones as well. In the short term, I think we've coped, right, and we've stepped up. The science is very optimistic about the long term with the development of vaccines, cheaper and more accessible testing, and increased awareness of how to stay safe. Letting us go back to work, travel, entertainment, what we've been calling the new normal in some sense. In this time, technology has been at the cornerstone of enabling people to work from home, go to school from home, and get healthcare from home. Across the industry, whether it's Microsoft, our competitors, or the incredible work being done by our partners as well, we feel very privileged and humbled to be able to play a part and contribute to society through technology in these times. And through our technology, enable our children, working professionals, and the elderly to get the connection, the care that they need in these times. I think when I think about your sort of first question, I think both immediate and over the years, our concern should mostly be with the poorest in society. For our daily laborers, our wage earners, for the unbanked, for those without savings, for children without access to digital technology and education, the pandemic has been hardest on them. So I feel as a society, our concern must be with how we can help raise up the weakest, either through individual giving, organizational CSR initiatives, or government interventions and investments. I think this has also been a time when people have demonstrated incredible courage in adapting their lives to the change. I think while we should be concerned about the pandemic, there are also many instances to celebrate the human spirit and what we've seen. For example, I have seen colleagues with hearing disabilities continue to participate in meetings and benefit from real-time artificial intelligence powered transcription of what's being spoken on calls, right? And that's a technology that's been a real enabler for people with hearing disabilities. The other one that I think we've seen, increased recognition of loneliness as a public health concern, and conversations about mental health and well-being have come out more into the public discourse, which is a really good thing. I think most of all, we can learn from, of course, the spirit and the adaptability of our children who have not been able to go out and play and also have had to adapt to remote learning, and they've done that in a heartbeat, adopting conferencing technology and really challenging our teachers as well in some sense, right? I think in education, teachers have been at the front line. I think their spirit of service, caring for children, I think they have spent so much time in their own learning and technology enablement so that they can continue with the education of our children. I recently had the opportunity to speak to one of the school principals in a village in Phagwara in Punjab, and she was telling us about how she has used Microsoft Teams to digitally enable all of the education across the school. I think just sort of coming to the close of my remarks, I think, when we look to the next year, I think the most important thing as individuals, organizations, is to continue to stay safe, right? Complying with the government, with local laws and recommendations, following the suggestions of public health officials, it's really crucial we do all of these to open up in a way that both keeps us safe as well as moves the economy into a higher gear. The pandemic has been hard on the poorest, and continuing to agitate and innovate on how we can contribute to bringing those most in need into the new normal, it's going to be of the utmost importance. To take a couple of minutes to talk about Microsoft India, our focus has been on the areas where we could add the most value through technology and digital transformation, while other institutions focus on what's sort of core to them. So we've been working with the government, with healthcare providers, schools, industries like the IT sector, banking, manufacturing, retail, all of which are critical to the continuity and stability of services in the country. We've done a lot of work with government first responders across the world, a lot of work again with schools and communities. For businesses, startups, SMBs, I think the productivity and the productivity software that we have, as well as sort of the communication software with Microsoft Teams, have been very critical for getting work done. Recently, we announced that we've made Microsoft Teams free for everyone to just enable this collaboration during these times. And I think last of all, we are investing in economic support for communities. Microsoft has a worldwide giving campaign with a equal match from the company to contributions made by individuals. And I think it's been a privilege to sort of contribute to various institutions that have been trying to make a difference at this time, with Microsoft also contributing an equal match on that. So to close, I would say while the pandemic has been challenging in many ways, it's been a time when we've learned that we are more similar to each other as human beings with the same shared experiences and challenges. It's been a time of increased empathy. Satya speaks a lot about this, and I think it's really shown up in our consciousness in these times of whether it's reconnecting with old friends or recognizing that a coworker needs help in balancing work and life, or working across boundaries with partners and competitors as well to help people, really win. It's been a time of technology acceleration and adoption, with many years of digital transformation accomplished in a few months. And it's shown the power of technology for good. At Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And personally, for me, the last 6 months has made the company mission come alive. I know that the work we do daily is impacting lives of people around the world. I think I'll just close by saying it's been a time to recognize the human spirit, adaptability of our children, our elders, the growth mindset of our teachers, and the courage of our healthcare professionals who still do need to go into work. So with that, I'll close, and thank you so much for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. I think you definitely have given us one more lever about why the world would get reset. I mean, when Ronald was talking about the COVID coming and resetting the world, he mentioned about policies, he mentioned about private companies taking up the initiative, and you have focused it a lot on how technology can not only be an enabler, I mean, it has always been an enabler, but in this special situation, it can help us to, look at our relationships in a very different manner, and hopefully it will be a very powerful tool to reset the world and understand the differences that still exist and how we can overcome that. So I will go back to Nikhil and ask him a question that, Nikhil, being a consultant, you are this this unique position where you can have an industry overview. So tell us a little bit about Indian companies. Among them, do you see great examples of dealing with the situation? I mean, examples of resilience, even anecdotal, but something that you thought that, wow, I mean, this is something remarkable.
Yes, indeed. Most of my consumer packaged goods companies, so some of the anecdotes that I have is from there, but this it's by no means restricted to that industry. Examples such as the ones that I came across have been there in different parts. Indeed, Rona talked about the shift or the reset that Indigo itself has gone through. But I mean, if I throw my mind back 6 months, from the first kind of shock of the lockdown, etc., which apart from everything else was just I mean absolutely 100% and immediate. The first instinct that I thought was great was how people in my client companies rallied to first make sure that everyone around them was safe and secure in terms of their own basic needs. The second thing which, and I can take, ITC or, Hindustan Lever as an example, was how quickly the internal processes or the internal, what was absolutely seen as rational and natural rules or, ways of working were actually thrown to the winds, and the degree of trust in each other came to the fore with respect to managing, what became from a health crisis to a logistics crisis. So if you think back in April, the issue wasn't one around, oh my God, how do we satisfy demand or, what's going on? It was essentially how I have goods in my warehouse, how do I get it to the distributor or the retailer or the end consumer? In order to do that, you absolutely said that, whether it was credit norms, whether it was, who's an authorized vendor and who's not, etc., all of those things which would be a standard way of working for a large company or a multinational operating in India were thrown to the winds. And, we said that we have to make this work, as possible and where possible. So I think, internally, we saw a number of changes that were happening in our clients, where the issue was, delivery. It wasn't actually as much about, doing everything by the book, because, that just wouldn't have worked. And last and very importantly, I saw a great example, and this is across, both food and beverage and home and personal care categories, where all of us, even in India, even today in India, are dependent on 10 million small retailers and them being able to do their business. Now, we have, as salaried workers or, people in large companies, we actually have a greater degree of cushion than the daily wage earner has. So I think, as I think back how, the FMCG companies reacted by making sure that, there was enough of a supply arranged to the local Kirana stores so that their businesses could keep working, to make sure that, those local Kirana stores could start ordering on WhatsApp or on phone, because, in their 200-meter radius, they were still operating, from 15th April onwards. So, but if they did not have anything to sell, their businesses and therefore their daily earning would come to a stop. So in doing that, I think, across different FMCG companies, there were many examples where the last mile, the frontline salesperson, the field people actually went, above and beyond the call of duty in making sure not that their business keeps working, but their customers' business keeps working.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikhil. Let me come to Mr. Datta. And, you have talked about this reset and it continues to intrigue me. You said that, yeah, in India, it is the private companies which needs to play a very active role, and we can't follow the Chinese model where the government is very dominant. But having said that, I don't think we can, ignore the government, right? I mean, they indeed are the policymakers. There is a very close link between business and government. So question for you, the one is more serious, is about what is the role you think that the government of India should play if we really are going to use this crisis as resetting? And the other one is a little bit, not so serious. How optimistic would you be if the US elections go the way, which way I'm talking about? So, both of these.
So the role of government, I'll be a little critical of the government because I think their goals are, or let's say their heart's in the right places, but there are problems in execution, I believe. I'll take two examples. I'll take the example of demonetization, and I'll take the example of the migrant crisis. So the goal in demonetization probably was a good one. Hey, there's so much black money in circulation. Let's demonetize and the black money will get extinguished and we'll only have white money left. Well, good goal. But after that happened, Indians are very, very creative. And all the black money came back as white money over a period of time. My question is, where was the Indian civil service in all this? I assure you, if this was happening in China, of course, they didn't have any advance notice. If this was happening in Japan, any other country, the civil service would have jumped in and said, okay, and the political leaders have announced this. We have 4 days to come up with a plan. How do we make sure the goals are met? I don't think anything happened. The people did their own creative things. And at the end, we look back after 3 months and we say, oh, that didn't work. And the rural people paid the price for it, right? People who had money in the mattress, they got screwed. People who had millions of dollars in their apartments, they did fine. It's a real failure, I think, not to seize opportunities like that and plan around it. The migrant crisis. I think we were all looking at the TV, watching people walking in the sun with babies in their arms. And we were all saying someone should do something. Well, who was that someone? Who should do something? Where was the civil service? So, I really find that as one of our weaknesses. And again, China, India comparison, India, Japan comparisons. The government has good objectives at times, but execution really is an issue. I will segue a little, although you didn't ask me the question as to the differences that I observe. Planning really is one of our weaknesses as a nation. Planning in advance, planning to detail. So people say, hey, infrastructure constraints, what's going to happen? Or the Commonwealth Games are coming, what's going to happen? Well, at the very end, it's like, oh, it's going to be a disaster. Somehow we scramble and make it work. I have a personal example. We're moving from Terminal 1 to Terminal 2 in Delhi. And I'm seeing in all these pictures that 3 days to go. And it's like, oh my God, we'll never make it. Because not just the interiors, you need the IT infrastructure, all that stuff to go on. And I'm like, 3 days left. Why didn't we do this earlier? No. Now we'll work overnight. We've got 3 shifts going, blah, blah, blah. Actually, we do make it work. But why this chaotic last minute stuff? Why can't we plan a little better? I mean, everyone talks about aviation growth and infrastructure and all that. I'm sure the infrastructure will come. I'm sure Navi Mumbai will get built. I'm sure Jiwar is going to be built. But it's last minute tensions. Oh my God, is this going to work? So that really is an area for us to look at. On the flip side of it, if you say, what is our greatest strength? I'm amazed at the quality of our people. I'll tell you, I mean, our people are really smart, really hungry, really eager to learn, really enthusiastic. All that sees us through. But boy, if only we could plan better. I think there's a two-part question, right? Was that it?
The other one was an American election.
Okay. So they say now, if you look at history, there are dark moments and you almost want to give up. And then good things happen. And there's also saying that the long arm of justice bends slowly, but it does lead to a good outcome. There are phrases like that which come to my mind. So yeah, America is going through a very dark period. And to an extent, I alluded to it earlier, this anger that created a Trump is because of failure of previous governments not to address issues. Let's go global. Let's move everything to China and Mexico. What's happening to jobs in the US, man? So that created a Trump. So getting Trump out is good, but the underlying issues that created a Trump also need to be addressed.
Okay. Which is a good thing for me to come back to Arun, because Arun, I wanted you to give us a sense of working in a multinational, and Microsoft is a leading tech company in the world, a leading company in any sense we look at. How do you see this? I mean, are there some specific challenges, because you have to constantly negotiate these two worlds? I mean, this is India and then there's the US. And of course, in US, there is this election thing. And we all know that significant policies are dependent on the result of the election, which today nobody has the courage to even predict, because so many predictions went wrong last time. Right? So give us a sense of that from a multinational perspective.
Yeah, so I think, from a Microsoft perspective, we are a company that's, that operates in 190 plus countries in the world, and also not only sort of operates, but has product development distributed across multiple countries in the world. I think the pandemic has been interesting, just to speak about the pandemic firstly, in terms of really accelerating the way distributed work happens, right? Just to give you a simple example of our teams in Redmond becoming much more aware, empathetic to people working across time zones, as they also started to work from home, having to take night calls, early morning calls, so on. And so that's kind of just accelerated this thing of, hey, even just this act of setting up a meeting, can we find a common time, right? It's a small example, but one that shows how the awareness of distributed work being a reality and becoming a reality is just accelerating. So that's one. I think the second thing, as Microsoft, I think Rono touched upon this, which is this notion of integrity and trust being very, very central to the way businesses are run. And how do we maintain that and continue to hold that high standard as we operate in in a remote work experience, right? Again, to give you a simple example from many of our customers, I think there's a reality of, earlier, if you were working in a bank or working in the government, you couldn't take your phone into work, your personal phone into work. But now you're working from home. So how does that change that experience of access to sort of, sensitive data and so on? So again, how do we build the tools around privacy, data security, compliance? Those are very much top of mind, and I think will accelerate how remote work gets done even further. Which brings me to your sort of last question around sort of the US elections. I think while I wouldn't sort of comment on the larger implications of that, I think again it's been an area that's been in the public discourse about social media, around data security, around how election outcomes can be influenced by bad actors, so to speak. And again, that's very much top of mind for us as an cloud infrastructure company running Microsoft Azure, of ensuring that the trust and integrity of customer data and of course the government, not only the US government, but governments across the world rely on our infrastructure. How can we make that extremely secure, data confidentiality and data sovereignty? How can we maintain that to ensure sort of, public processes like the elections to proceed in a free and fair way? So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Arun. Now I'm just scanning through some of the questions which has been posed by the participants, and I will go with Nikhil first. Nikhil, there is a sense that because of the crisis that we are going through, a lot of inefficient companies or a lot of inefficiencies are being taken out of the system. I mean, so what is your view of that? I mean, is it really a test of survival of the fittest, or do you think it otherwise? And the related question is, then when the crisis moves away, then how do you think it is going to unfold?
So two comments to this. One is that yes, obviously those who were more so those who were inadvertently better prepared are actually in a better position to ride through these rough times for sure. So that's that's a given. But I wouldn't distill it down to those to this being some sort of a Schumpeterian, creative destruction sort of a moment, Prof. And the reason I say that is that a lot of the pain that companies have gone through is because of the over financialization of business rather than the inherent, strength or lack thereof in the business itself. When, if you are a cinema hall owner, it doesn't matter really, in terms of, how well or how badly you ran the company. Right now, 6 months of zero revenue and, all of the fixed costs, it's difficult for anyone to get through that. And especially if you are over leveraged, etc., then of course you're absolutely dead in the water. So that's the first part of the question. To the second part, I think, yes, there is absolutely, an important thing that everyone who's going to be in business going forward needs to grapple with. How much of what we have gone through is actually, something that's different in the moment versus a long-term shift. So the fact that all of us are much more, pardon the pun, but at home with, not spending as much as we were used to. All of us are, realizing that, much of the either, going out or, consumption expenditure that we used to do, one can actually be fine without those things. How many of those changes are temporary and how many of those changes are actually longer term? That's something that companies will have to deal with. And we see some, emergent views with respect to 2 or 3 very different cohorts of consumption coming out as we come out and the sun comes up again. But that's going to be very different industry to industry. And yes, at an industry level, there are going to be some where the future is going to be very, very different, while for others where, yes, with a 10-20% delta, the next few years will be relatively similar to the last many.
Thank you. Next question, I will go to Mr. Ronojoy. Mr. Datta, you must be getting this question everywhere, but you can't avoid it at IIM or any event hosted by IIM because, our students are strategy students. They read about the airlines industry and we know how difficult this place is. I mean, apparently, Richard Branson had said this very famously, the best way to make $1 million is to invest $1 billion in the airlines industry. And so the thing is, how does Indigo do it? I mean, you have been doing it. You have seen your colleagues been doing it. So how do you remain so well, so profitable? What are some of those secret sauce?
Yeah. I think this analogy works in life and it works in the airline business. In life, if you follow Indian philosophy, life is a narrow trail through a jungle. Like the Pandavas were going to heaven. Only Yudhishthira made it, right? The others fell off the cliff, this happened, that happened. Life is like that. Right from the beginning, you're on a narrow trail. You go off the trail, you get lost. I'm not going to study. I'm going to do drugs. I'm not going to marry once. I'm going to marry thrice. I'm going to do... You go off the trail and you're lost. So the trail is narrow. That's where the term razor's edge comes from. But stick to the trail and you'll make it. Same thing applies for airlines. There's a very narrow trail of success. It's well known, but people get distracted. Vijay Mallya will say, oh, I will build such an airline that people have never seen anything like it before. And he spends money on products and God knows what else. He's gone off the trail. He'll never find his way back. And Naresh Goyal says, instead of sticking to the domestic market and making it work, and Jet was a great airline. He says, it'll be fun flying to London and New York, and let's do that with wide body. He's gone off the trail and he's fallen off the cliff. So stick to the knitting. Everyone says, fly to London, do this, do that. No, guys, our trail is narrow. We are not going off. If we stick to the trail, we'll make money. So find out what the trail is in life, in business, in your industry, and for God's sake, be competent and stick to the trail.
Nikhil, a question for you that has come up saying that consultants are known for, traveling very extensively, meeting clients, etc. Now, how do you deal with it when you are in this kind of situation? Or what has been, at some level it seems to be a disaster, right? You can't go and meet a client, but has it been so bad, or what has been some of the learnings as you have done in the last 6-7 months?
So it's been different, and it took getting used to for sure. So I'm not going to diminish how much of a change it was, but we recognize along with our long-standing clients that this is the new world, and it's one of the things that sort of we were very clear about early on, that this isn't going away anytime soon. So it's not the 45-day lockdown, or it's not the 21-day lockdown. This is here to stay for at least 6 months, if not 12 plus months. So that meant that we were forced to change our ways of interaction far more. Now, some of the things that we used to work with our clients on, so shop floor operational kind of improvement, productivity improvement, etc., that sort of work actually did get paused or stopped for a while. But you also have to realize that businesses keep working in even in these times, and therefore the requirement for advice or the requirement for working together to create results still happens. So we made do with what was available. Last, but I thought that what would stand us in good stead was just kind of clients who we have partnered with over the last many years. They know us, we know them, and therefore that real world interaction and trust was already developed. I was very, very pleasantly surprised also by the number of new starts that we had as new companies who had heard of us from our existing clients came to us and said that, I believe you're doing some interesting stuff there. Why don't we catch up on Teams or Zoom or what have you, and then start some new work together. That was surprising, frankly, even after having thought about it. But the fact that it worked out gives me more confidence that, yep, we are an adaptable species. We'll learn to work through this also.
Okay, thank you. Arun, there is a question that has come. One is people are asking that, do you see, what are some of the downsides you are seeing in terms of this tech-based collaboration? I mean, obviously it has helped us to kind of continue with most of the work that we have been doing, but what are some of the downsides? That is one. And then the larger question, because you had talked about AI and ML, and there is this whole thing that, this is eventually going to result in reduction of workforce. And now this time, we are not talking about reduction of blue collar work, but it's actually reduction of, knowledge workers, right? So any thoughts on these two?
Yeah, so let me talk about the first one. See, I think more than downsides, or rather in the long run, I do see a lot of opportunities that have arisen from this, right? Many of the challenges that people are having, like what Nikhil also mentioned, in terms of working remotely with customers or shop floor optimizations, so on. I think there are there already were things like augmented reality, virtual reality, what we were doing with HoloLens, that can sort of enable those richer experiences. And I think it's going to get accelerated for us to see, remote work become much better. That said, it clearly is not going to address everything, right? There's nothing like being there in person and meeting somebody, especially for the human connection. So even if I think about or reflect upon what we used to do as Microsoft India, where we used to travel often to Redmond for meetings. People from Redmond used to come down to India. I think many of the work meetings, in fact, can be done effectively remotely in our industry, while a lot of the human connection will continue to happen in person, right? So whether it is events to sort of get to know each other, industry conferences. So I almost see it as the economic spend on this becoming more optimal, so to speak, with things that can be digitally, sort of the spend going more towards that, and things that are better done in person, those continue to grow. Now, coming to the second sort of question that you have, the Microsoft perspective on that has always been human plus AI, right? Not sort of human versus AI or AI replacing work. I think this has, again, a long history to it, right? Whether it's been books or the telephone or the telegraph or television, there've just been so much. Even with the printing press, there was just this time when people felt that, hey, children are spending all their time reading and not doing productive work. So this thesis that technology is going to replace work has actually, I wouldn't say not borne out, but what has happened is, to the point of the human spirit and the creativity, we've always found new ways, richer ways in which to express ourselves as human beings, and to make the mundane tasks automated. So I'm not at all sort of pessimistic about it. In fact, I'm very optimistic that all of our work is going to become more enriching, more fulfilling. We'll have potentially more free time and leisure as a species in the long run as we adopt technology even further. So that's, I think, my point of view, and our company point of view, I think, has been of human plus AI and how we can use technology to enhance the abilities of our workers, not sort of replace that. So,
Thank you. Next question is actually, for all of you. So I will go probably one by one, and you can take your pick who would like to take it. And this I know is a little bit putting in the spot, but it is very important, I think, for our students to get a sense of this. Where do you think the economy is going now, in the sense how bad is bad, and what is your sense of when do you think will be the uptake? And well, I mean, forecasting is always dangerous, but nevertheless, I mean, you are each of you are in a vantage point to look at the industry and know about the world a lot better. And why I am asking this question is because I think it's very important for our students. We have close to 300 viewers now looking at this session, and I'm assuming that majority of them are students, and each of them need to take difficult decisions, important decisions about their lives and career. They had joined certain careers, certain business schools with some expectations, and now, it's so much of a chaos, right? So Nikhil started with the whole thing that, despite all the uncertainty, planning is always very important. So this probably will give them an input into their planning. Where do you see it going? I mean, how bad is going to be in the next few months, and then when do you think we are going to see some kind of recovery? Nikhil, you go ahead.
Yeah, Prof, I'm not in at all any position to talk about, when it's going to come back to 8% or 10%. This is going to be a terrible year. So the next year being a plus 8% or 10% is not going to mean, the same as what it used to, right? It's just going to be a low base effect next year. I also, to the students, because you framed it as such, I would say that, a career is a 25 plus year journey. And yes, one will be lucky if, over the 25 years, there's, only one or two, kind of very deep unanticipated shocks, whether at an individual, organization, or the economy level. Usually there are always, a few times where, whether it happens to the economy or not, it happens to you or to your organization, that there is a downturn. I mean, We have our own, Microsoft went through many years of, really in the wilderness, and, what a spectacular rise from the ashes that that company has done. I talked earlier about Hindustan Unilever. It's a darling of the stock market, so it's a darling of the financial press today. It had a lost decade from 2000 to 2010. If someone goes back and looks at what HUL was doing then, it was doing a lot of good stuff, but pretty much it was, the outcome was like spinning wheels in the mud. So to the career point, I would say that, don't let this immediate time grind you down. On the economy, coming back to that, I do want to share one more data point, which is really about, what is the nature of our economy now. All of us know that India is a consumption demand driven economy, was till recently, and will remain so. But who consumes? So here's the thing, this is work that I did, last year, 2019, January, for the World Economic Forum guys, and I presented there. But it was very telling, in as much as you have to understand that I used different measures for low income, lower mid, upper mid, and high income, and you've got the numbers on the first column. So forget the poverty, below poverty line, that's 20% of our population. But even if you take everyone below 20,000 rupees per month household income as low income, 20,000 rupees per month for a household of 5. That's 43% of our population. Then, 2.5 to 5 lakhs per annum is 33, so on and so forth, right? You can see in the income that the top 3% accounts for 7% of disposable income, etc. But look at the middle column. 2/3 of our household consumption expenditure actually happens from the low or the lower middle income households. Now, on top of that, please overlay the last column, which is that if you look at the sources of income, it is 52% casual wage and casual wage plus self-employed. 52% is self-employed, 38% is casual wage. Even in the top earning households of the country, 66% is self-employed. Now these are the doctors and the chartered accountants of the country, etc. Right? But different. But an economy which is so dependent on the spending of them, not of us, and I use the them and us very advisedly, because I think that many of us remain in our heads as participants in and serving an economy which doesn't actually talk to a bulk of the Indian population. But the economy is going to run or not run, not based on what you and I do in our day-to-day spending decisions. It's going to run or not based on what 75% of our population, counting from the bottom, does or doesn't do. So that is something that I think is important for us to recognize, and in our own self-interest, make sure that we get this part of the country back to work and back to spending. Not for any altruistic, for pure self-interest reasons.
Thank you. Mr. Datta, your take on how bad is it going to be, and when are we going to see something?
So I think we are in for a rough 18 months. And yes, industries will revive. But unfortunately, this is my view based on Indigo's outlook, I don't think industries will hire aggressively. Because we're still trying to get back to, hey, our capacity utilization is low, revenue is much lower. So I don't see a hiring binge for at least 8 months. After that, I'm quite confident of the Indian economy. And again, you should talk to economists who would probably give you an in-depth analysis of this. But from my meager knowledge of this, the reason I'm optimistic is 2 things. India's savings rate is high. When your savings rate is high, it flows into investment in some shape or form. And our banks are not in terrible shape. So when we went into the 2008 crisis in the US, it was all the bank's balance sheet were destroyed, right? I don't see that here. So those sort of things give me confidence to say, yeah, we will come back. We may not go to 9%, but we'll definitely be in the 5-6% range very quickly. you are entering the job market at a difficult time. I think that's the crux of this issue. And yeah, I won't tell you that there will be lots of hiring. There will be hiring in certain areas though. Digital, IT, anything technology related seems to be doing very well, purely from a hiring employment standpoint. Basic industries, auto, airlines, transportation, they'll all struggle. To the extent, Nikhil talked about this is a 30-year marathon you're on. To the extent you find yourself on the beach, so to speak, where, hey, the job offers are just not there. I would encourage you strongly to work on your personal development. Learning never stops. I've said before how strong this generation and its merit is. Please develop yourself, because there are skills you will need in the job market later. Communication skills, presentation skills, language skills. Work on those things, so you shouldn't be like, oh, there's nothing here and therefore I'm going to go to seed. No, stick to the trail, develop yourself. Things will open up in 18 months, I would say.
Thank you. Arun, artificial intelligence is all about predictions, right? And so you and Microsoft must be having the answers which we are looking for.
Yeah. Firstly, I would say I broadly agree with what Rono shared in terms of sort of the outlook. Let me address the second part first, which is sort of career and students graduating, right? As I said, agree with Rono. I think invest in self-development, but even sort of going beyond that, I think starting something, I actually feel it's not a bad time to start something. There are many opportunities that the pandemic has brought up. They are not the same opportunities as before, right? But there are many new ones. And in IIM, you have the best and the brightest. And I think each of you could look to start and grow and build companies of the future in this time for sure. So don't rule that out is one thing I would say. The second thing is definitely technology has remained a constant, and I think is going to continue to remain sort of a cornerstone of how growth revives. And the technology industry is hiring. So you could look to how do I participate in that, again, from a career standpoint as a student at this time. Coming back to that question of, hey, when do things go back to normal? It's very hard to call. My sense of it is this, that definitely there are many industries that are going to get fundamentally affected, right? It's probably a reset of a couple of years, if not more, for many sectors. And then there are new sectors coming up, as well as areas like technology, which are continuing to see growth. So the overall sort of GDP number as a single number is a hard one to unpack, right? Because you might see a sort of 8% growth in 18 months, but where did that 8% come from? And did something grow at 20%, whereas others contracted? I think that's going to be the reality of it. My sort of guidance in some sense to the students would be, look at the constants, right? Things like definitely healthcare is a constant that's going to remain. Technology is a constant. I'm a big believer that F&B industry is a constant. People do need to sort of eat and drink, right? So I think while there are going to be shifts, I think there are certain constants as human beings that people can look at and say, hey, these are going to continue to grow. And if I were a student, that's kind of the way I would think about it.
Okay, we are towards the end.
If I may just, sorry, if I may just add a couple of things, just picking up from both what Arun and Rono were talking about. I think, much more depends. So, absolutely agree with both of them about, the possibilities, and especially for students of IIM Bangalore. I mean, really, the notion that any of them will have to stay on the beach for any extended period of time, it's not as bad as that. But if they do, then as Rona was saying, there's enough to do in terms of personal development. But I do want to go back to what Arun was talking about with respect to the advancements of technology and, greater amount of non-drudgery sort of work, possible, etc. Let's not forget that it was in 1930 that Keynes wrote about, the economic possibilities for our grandchildren, where this idea that, anyone would have to work for more than 15 hours a week, it was, no one would have to work for more than 15 hours a week because that would be enough as long as we managed our, redistribution well, that would produce enough economic output in the world to keep everyone, satiated. Now, 90 years from then, we know that it hasn't happened, not because, the economic activity in the world hasn't gotten there. Remember that if you just divide the total world GDP by the total world population, GDP, every year's GDP of the world divided by the 7 billion people on the planet, everyone would be above $40,000 or $26,000 of annual income. That is the US poverty line, not the India poverty line. So we have enough to go around to get everyone in the world, whether they are in the villages of India or sub-Saharan Africa or interior China, above the US poverty line. So the reason I was reminded was about this, work leisure thing. It is our insatiable appetite for more and more at an individual level and the society's choices with respect to growth versus redistribution that we have to reset. And if it's not us, then maybe I fervently hope the next generation will sort itself out.
So since we are closing this, my last set of questions, and very much taking from what Nikhil was talking about, and Rono has been at this theme since we started. What should the students do to change this world? I mean, what is your advice? One or two? What should they do differently? Because they have been hearing this, and yet, there are realities. There are realities of, immediate reality of absence of job, and the reality is that many of the students are leveraged. They have taken loans to study. But a little long term, obviously, that what is it that they should do to make this change that all of us are hoping will happen, because we probably miserably failed in bringing about the change, right? So what should they do differently?
Well, I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious of the group of people that I'm talking to. So you'll relate to it very naturally, I think. First of all, I think every individual should be competent. Work on your competency. It's unconscionable not to be competent. Whether you're a carpenter or a plumber, if they come and do a lousy job, you know how angry and frustrated we get. So whatever your profession is, please be very competent about it. Secondly, don't let emotions get in the way of your decisions. And by emotions, I mean mostly egoistic emotions. I've had numerous ups and downs in my career. And quite often, I was going to make the wrong decision emotionally. This is unfair. This is not right. I will show them. Who do they think they're talking to? Those are all emotional-based decisions. And I came close to making the wrong decisions. Be competent. There will be, your pride will be hurt, your ego will be hurt. Let that not drive your decisions. Third, please be very, very conscious of the responsibility that's thrust on you. The responsibility to take care of your family, your kids, your fellow workers, whoever you touch in your life, you actually have a responsibility towards each one of them. Don't be the taker, be the giver in all those situations. And then I had this wonderful promise for you, which only as Indians you'll relate to. And I'm guessing you're all under 30 or thereabouts. And all your focus is on the external world, and rightfully so. Jobs, career, housing, marriage, all external world. You have a wonderful secret that will come to you when you're 45 years old. And you realize that you also make an internal journey, which you're not even aware of, I'm sure, at your age. And that internal journey is the one that gives you happiness and takes you more than happiness. It takes you to bliss. So watch out for that when you're 45. Be open to it. Thank you.
Nikhil or Arun, whoever wants to go.
I can jump in. So I'll just say a couple of things. I think building on what Rono shared, I would encourage every student to think about how they can be of service to others, right? I think the real joy that Rono was referring to comes when you see customers win, employees win, when you raise others up to success. And again, each of the students at IIM is really bright and will land on their feet. But how can you also make 5 others land on their feet? How can you raise 5 others up? I think that will be just a transformation in society. So I would say definitely that. And the other one, again, sort of touching upon what Rono shared and saying it in my own words, is reflect deeply on your own values and think about things like integrity and trust and how you can stand for being a person of your word. I think is a very critical thing in these times. It is a time not only of a pandemic, but also of what we are seeing across the world, across governments, in terms of ethics and ethical decisions. And so reflecting deeply on values, on integrity is it's just a game changer and a thing that will stand everyone in good stead across the years. So I'll just stop with that. Nikhil.
Thank you. What wonderful messages from both of you. Thank you for sharing that. I'll just add one thing, which is maybe just building off what both my co-panelists have said, which is the following, that we all as individuals have to remember that we are a part of a much larger whole. And yes, there's this compelling idea that there's serious problems in the world and hardship and pain. And we should individually be humble and modest in our belief that we can ourselves eliminate any of those things. But we shouldn't use any of that as an excuse for either cynicism or inaction. We have to have the sense that we have to make these efforts knowing that they are hard and not allow us to swing from naive idealism to bitter realism. That is what our job is as young people. And that is what I'd invite the best and brightest who are at IIM Bangalore to do over the next many years.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. It was a pleasure and learning experience listening to you. And I hand you over to Sonali.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists and Professor Mukherjee for your valuable time and this very insightful session. As a token of our appreciation, a contribution has been made in your names to Setrees Foundation, an organization that works on tree plantation in India. Agroforestry saplings have been planted in your name, and this has really made a difference to the life of a farmer in Karnataka. I'd also like to mention that participants may visit our virtual stalls to have a unique interactive experience, learn about all our partners, and participate in quizzes to win cash prizes. The link is posted in the chat window. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. It was a pleasure being part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.